Hello, everyone. Welcome to WP Roundtable, our first episode of the year, and we're getting going with a great guest to start off. What year is this? 2016? How do you spell that?
Right.
Jason Crawford coming to you from Medellin, Colombia, and looking forward to this one. So, who's next?
Hey, I'm Mark. I'm in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and freezing my butt off.
Oh, poor Mark.
I know. Sad story.
Yeah, that's really sad. We feel for you. I feel so bad for you. It's snowing over here, but I've got a heater, so I'm quite nice and warm. Hey guys, I'm Kyle. I'm a co-founder of Real Big Marketing in Jackson, Michigan, and I'm really excited about this episode and this exciting new year. It's going to be a really, really good one. It's going to be a great one for Jason in particular, who was a father for the first time. Congratulations.
Yay! Congratulations. Where's the sound effect?
Yeah, who's doing sound effects?
And what sound effect do we want for that?
Doggone it.
Well, it's either applause or crying. I'm not sure which.
I think it's gas applicable. Is there one for gas?
I don't know. Yay, Jason.
All right, we'll take it.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Anyway, so it's going to be a great year. We've got so much lined up. We've got a really good schedule lined up. We've got a whole bunch of cool new guests. So anybody, I recommend check out, when you can, the WP Roundtable schedule, wproundtable.com/schedule, and you're going to see some cool stuff we got lined up, some great episodes that are coming. Starting off the season right with an extra special guest, we've got Mr. Joe Dolson with us today. Joe, do you want to say hi real quick?
Hey, I'm Joe Dolson. I'm coming out of St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm glad to see you all here.
St. Paul, Minnesota. That's cool. I was just over there a few months back. It was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, well, right now it's a little cold, but not really much to speak of for a regular Minnesota winter. It's been pretty balmy.
Oh, well. You've got an NFC North title to celebrate.
Boo. Where's the boo sound effect?
Yeah, boo.
I see there's some bias there.
There we go.
But we don't want to talk about that. Anyway, right now we're going to talk about our quick picks of the week real quick before we get into learning a lot more about our very special guest. So my quick pick of the week is, what was it? Just about a month ago, WordCamp US. Pretty much all of us were there except for Sats and Jason. And we had a great darn awesome time, and a couple of us gave presentations, and all the videos are now available on WordPress.tv. So I'm going to drop a link to this event. It was really incredible. There were a ton of amazing presentations, just some of the best you'll ever see, and including Joe's, who did a really, really cool lightning talk, and I did a lightning talk as well. So my pick of the week is just kind of peruse those videos. They're very, very well done. The presentations are absolutely top-notch. So it's time well spent poring over those videos. So that's it.
All right, so my pick of the week, I was going to recommend, How to Quit Being a Crybaby for Mark, but after last week, I thought maybe that'd be a little bit too harsh on him.
That was 3 weeks ago.
Oh, the last episode. I apologize. So instead, I chose another one for Mark, and it is philosophizethis.org. It's a great podcast about philosophy, and I'm about a dozen episodes into it. So I don't know if they're going to cover the difference between the Gregorian and Julian calendar for Mark. Hopefully it'll get covered, though.
These are important things, very important things. But thank you, Jason, for that. I will have to check out Philosophize This. And I don't even know what to do with that. So my pick of the week is a little bit self-serving and not at the same time. We had a few months ago, actually it was almost a year ago, we had Tricia Salas, who's a developer in the WordPress community. She created a really nice WordPress theme that utilized Reveal.js, which is a presenter framework that allows you to create slide presentations and whatnot. And she created a nice theme that allows you to do it, but it's really in beta, and we were going to be working on it, but the reality is we just don't have the time. So if you go to GitHub, you can find WP Presenter, and we're basically putting it sort of up for grabs for someone if they want to take over the development of this. And people who speak at WordCamps and whatnot could really use this. If they already use Reveal.js, this makes it a lot easier. github.com/serverpress/wp-presenter. You can look it up. And if you're interested, give us a call or email us, or email Sarah at serverpress.com and get all the details.
Do you have an 800 number?
And I'm so glad you asked.
Joe, do you have a quick pick do you want to share this week?
I do have a quick pick. I just came up with it. It's a fabulous site called derailingfordummies.com, which was brought to my attention just this afternoon during our WordPress accessibility team meeting by Rion Rietveld. It's the guide to just how to twist that conversation and marginalize those around you. Read it, enjoy it, and then never, ever do it again.
Wow. This sounds like, I mean, Jason gave a site that sounds like something I would do, and you just gave a site of something that sounds like something I would do at the same time. It's just, wow.
Yeah, definitely want to check this one out.
Yeah, me too.
Gosh,
That's awesome.
yeah.
Except the never do it again part, I'm not sure I'm on board with that.
Well, you know, it takes time.
That's awesome. Yeah, let's get a link shared for that because I want to check it out too. Joe, let's talk about you. Let's talk about your background, if you don't mind. We want to learn a lot about you, and I've been kind of following what you do and bumping into and learning about your stuff for quite some time now. You've been very active in the world of WordPress, and your name has kind of become synonymous with web accessibility, at least in the circles that I'm in. So that's really something special. So we're going to talk a lot about that, but I want to go back just a little bit and learn more about your story and how you got to where you are. So can you take us back like long before you were working in the web or had a career, you know, before your career really got got going at all? What kind of things were you seeking to do?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I did my college degree in music performance and in classical civilizations. So I had major career goals with those degrees. I mean, you can only imagine the kind of money I was pursuing. And so when I got out of school, I was, shall we say, less than entirely directional in my idea of what I was going to do with my life. And I actually, at the end of the summer after graduating, a summer in which I really didn't do much of anything at all, which was a wonderful time, and I highly recommend it, I just walked into my alma mater's computer lab to print out a copy of my resume while I still had access to those computers, since I didn't own one yet at the time. And it turned out my former boss in the library, because I'd been a student worker there, was leaving her job. And I was like, well, I'll just apply for that. And so that was where I landed in my first job. Basically, I never got around to the whole applying for a job part. But an academic library was a great place to get started. It had certain advantages, such as, I mean, it's an environment where accessibility really matters, and people are passionate about making sure everybody in the community is able to access all of those resources. And on top of that, it's very data-oriented. It's all about information structure. And so I got a really good crash course in just how you organize information. And so over time, as I decided that I wanted to kind of explore the web and computers and computer programming, that was a really great place to kind of kickstart that process.
What were your responsibilities in this job?
I worked in periodicals and book repair, which book repair is actually really cool, just for the record. Rebinding books and repairing page tears and holes and that sort of thing. Wow. And then the periodicals was a lot about just organizing huge quantities of physical journals in the library. They don't do that so much anymore now that everything is online, but at the time it was still a major thing to do and was very important. So my whole job from that time started to change. And actually I very intentionally pursued the web as a way to change my job. Because in that position, the organization did everything based on pay grades, and your pay grade was tied to your job description. And so the way to bump up a pay grade was to change your job description. So I managed about 18 student workers, and so I developed an online manual. I learned how to program HTML. I built a manual that they'd have to reference for how to do their jobs, how to handle policies, procedures, and so I just made it so that it was necessary for the person in my position to maintain a website in order to do the job, which allowed me to resubmit my job description for a pay grade bump, which I then got.
How ingenious.
So that all worked out really well for me. And that was kind of the start of my learning how to do anything on the web. I guess that was in about 2001.
So before we get too far into this, I've got a slightly off-topic one. I don't know if you're prepared for this, but can you give an elevator speech on your studies of classic civilizations? What exactly does that cover?
Well, I mean, it's an offshoot of the classics degree. And a traditional classics degree is primary languages. It's Greek and Latin and the texts that go along with them. But the school I went to offered a classical civilization track as well, which is primarily based on history. So it was a study of the Roman and Greek eras going into the early part of the Common Era. And what I primarily studied was the interactions between Rome and the Jewish nation-state of Israel in those areas and those territories, and how they interacted in the area roughly between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE.
All right. Well, I'm seriously looking for any podcasts on Greek history, so if you find one, please send it my way.
I'll keep that in mind.
All right.
Well, it makes me wonder too. I'm also curious about the musical performance. Like, how'd you get into that, and what sort of instruments were you playing?
Well, I'm a violinist actually, and I started playing the violin when I was 3.
Wow.
So that's something I've been doing for a very long time. And really, you know, it's one of those things. I've done it all my life. I don't really have any memories of a time of life where I didn't do music. So it's kind of a core part of who I am. And I still play the violin. I just left being the concertmaster of a community orchestra in town here that I'd been concertmaster of for 15 years. My business is too busy now. I don't really have time to keep that up, but I still play with the orchestra. And I do chamber music and other things like that. But I'm a classical musician by training, and I did a degree in that in college. I also did a lot of stuff with conducting and composition, so I kind of had broad interests throughout that, but essentially my degree is a performance degree.
Wow. That sounds really cool. We've had, it seems, a lot of musicians on the show before, but not too many who've been playing for that long, or
I feel totally intellectually inadequate at this point in time. Actually.
That's okay. I feel like an inadequate programmer, so you know we're all cool here.
Yeah, we can relate. So you concocted this scheme of giving yourself a pay grade and changing your pay description. You had this job and things were going pretty well. How'd things progress from there? What was next?
Well, during this whole time where I was working, just for the record, I was working at McAllister College in St. Paul. My girlfriend was working on a PhD at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. And obviously you may recognize that St. Paul, Minnesota and Rochester, New York are not particularly close to each other, which makes that kind of difficult. So, you know, eventually I just moved. And so then I started looking for jobs in Rochester. And the economy in Rochester, New York is not great. You know, it's a town whose history is really wrapped up in, say, Eastman Kodak and Bosch and Lohm, and a lot of things with film and optics, both of which are industries that have changed a lot in the last 15 to 20 years. And, you know, even though optics has in most ways exploded, it's still a massive shift in economy. So Rochester, let's just say that the jobs weren't great. And so I was looking for jobs in academic libraries, and I finally got a part-time job in a public library for a while, and then I got a part-time job in an academic library, and really I kind of hated them. You know, working part-time at a nominal salary was really not very cool. And I didn't have the resume to really apply for a job at a you know, a web development company or anything, or at least I didn't believe I did. And so, in a slightly odd choice, which, you know, I recognize looking back was an odd choice to make at the time, I decided to just head out on my own and become an independent contractor in the on the web. And I wanted to do something more than just be another designer developer, so I grabbed the idea of something socially motivated, something that can really make me feel good about the work I do, and that's what led me down the path towards web accessibility. I already knew a lot about the idea of web accessibility and about just accessibility in general because of my background in the library and because my mother was the executive director for an organization that handled accessibility for people in the arts. And so I had a lot of background there. What I didn't have was a lot of information about actually programming, running a business, working with clients. So it was interesting. It was a unique way to decide to dive in, feet first.
Oh.
Is that a sound effect?
Sorry.
So, did you start like your own company, or did you go in working for somebody? How did you like start taking this idea of accessibility and moving it forward into a work?
Well, I mean, what I did is I just set up as my own web development and design company, which is still what I'm doing. It's the same company. Nothing's changed in that sense. And what I was doing is general web development and design, specifically that was going to be accessible websites, making sure these sites were usable by people with disabilities. And what I've always worked my business, well, until recently when I have developed such a name for accessibility that I can't really, it's not, you know, something I'm doing subtly. It was always the goal is that I was a web developer and a designer, and I took contracts and gave them accessible websites. It wasn't that they could hire me and for an extra cost I'd make it accessible, or I was specifically marketing accessibility. I was marketing web development, and they would get an accessible website. And that's always the way I've worked. Is accessibility is just part of what I do.
But it wasn't really part of your sales pitch then?
No.
It was just part of the included features or whatever. And
Yeah,
what year would you say that this was about?
2004.
Wow. So there wasn't a lot of discussion going on at the time about accessibility at all.
Well, the larger community has definitely changed a lot since then. Within accessibility circles, obviously there was a lot of discussion of it. They were small circles. And as far as anybody else concerned, any potential clients, that sort of thing, really the only place of interest, and this is where I really got my start in terms of my client base, was actually in SEO. And so my first big circle of clients were all in SEO, because there's a huge amount of overlap in the technical aspects of SEO and making websites accessible. So I got to start doing a lot of that kind of thing.
That's fascinating. I wish I could have been around at that time because I didn't. It was some years after that before I was introduced into web development and began doing it professionally. But the early days of professional SEO and services of that nature, gosh, that's such a different landscape than it is today.
Yeah, it really, 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 really was.
Well,
It just sounds like the Wild West.
Well, there weren't standards back then, right? It was kind of you might have at most talked about standards or having
for
standards.
SEO or for accessibility.
For accessibility.
There were absolutely there were standards.
Were there?
Standards go back quite a long ways. I mean, Section 508 of the ADA was published in 1998. and that was based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 1.0 and another preceding document that I forget about. So these things were there. Web Content Accessibility Guide, I'm just going to call it WCAG. That's what we usually call it for short. WCAG 1.0 was a problematic document because it was extremely technology specific. So it had very detailed guidelines for things like how you need to handle a server-side image map to make it accessible. So why on earth would anybody use a server-side image map in the modern day and age? I mean, frankly, it was marginally useful even when people did use them. But now, no, there's no way. It's just a useless guideline to even have. So, WCAG 2.0 is a rewriting of all of those guidelines to make them not be dependent on any specific technology, so that as technology changes and grows, they can remain useful. That, of course, also makes them difficult to understand sometimes, because they aren't, going to say specifically, this is how you use this element accessibly, because they're like, well, we have to acknowledge the fact that this element may not exist in 10 years, and we don't want our document to suddenly become obsolete because of that. So, that's something you have to kind of absorb. It's really about principles and not necessarily about specific technology.
Well, sure. And back in 2004, I'm assuming you weren't doing WordPress at the time. So what were you?
Indeed.
What led you from doing whatever you were doing at the time into getting into the WordPress world?
Well, I mean, obviously I started doing static websites, which was all fine and good. But then as soon as I started getting into sites that were more than, 15 pages, static sites started to become a real pain. And so I didn't want to do that anymore. Now, I would like to say that at this point I jumped into WordPress, but actually at this point what I did is I wrote my own CMS, which I still have clients using and am still supporting. And there are many, many parts of my life where I say to myself, gosh, I wish I'd jumped to WordPress a little bit sooner. But I didn't. That took a couple years more before I kind of said, okay, what's this WordPress thing seems like it's pretty solid. It's got a good user base. I guess I'll try it out and explore it. And I mean, in all honesty, I started using it in 2006. But at that time, I really wasn't doing anything more than building, blogs. I did a lot of work where people had existing websites, and they just wanted that design cloned into a WordPress theme. So there was a good year or two where I did a lot of just cloning an existing site into a WordPress theme for a blog. But it wasn't until probably 2008, 2009 that I really started using it as a primary CMS platform. And that made my life a lot easier. Maintainability, yay, somebody else's problem. Fixing bugs, yay, a lot of this is somebody else's problem. Great, love it.
Yeah. So I'm curious about a little bit, if you can talk about, because you've been doing this for a while, and you've been serving clients for 11 years now,
yeah.
I guess. And over that time, you've provided, or you've emphasized your services a little differently. I think you alluded to a little. And so I'm curious about the point at which, and if you could talk about like specific experiences or light bulb moments where you started to say, this I should place my emphasis on accessibility and use this to sell my services more and get people to come to me for this specifically as opposed to someone else. Like, when did you transition at that point?
That's an interesting question. I really haven't ever done that. I mean, my business has always been called Accessible Web Design, and it's only in relatively recent years that people have even generally understood what that meant. For a long time, people just thought, oh, well, that guy, yeah, he's really accessible. He'll respond to your email. which was not what I intended, though it was generally true. But I haven't actually focused on advertising accessibility. I haven't made that something that I'm really focusing on. It's kind of happened on the side, but in all honesty, the things that I really try and sell and the things that I do within WordPress in particular are really quite different. My business has shifted a lot in the last few years because I'm doing premium plugin sales, and it's always an awkward thing when I'm at a WordCamp and I'm talking about accessibility, and the fact is, if somebody were to go to my website, they'd learn some stuff about accessibility, but the only things that they'd find that they could do in terms of, say, giving me money are buying my premium plugins or making a gift to support my continuing development of the free plugins. I don't actually directly offer services off my site anymore. Basically, I have enough clients that I've had over the last decade that I really don't want to do that. I don't have enough time to add more clients as a general rule. So it's complicated. I think I've managed to convey that it's complicated. I'm not sure I've managed to communicate anything else.
Well, you're certainly that's an interesting spot for a lot of reasons, and there's a lot of things that we could go into there. It's amazing that you can say that I have such a base of clients I'm so confident and can count on that I don't need to promote my consultant services. I don't need to worry about that at all, and you're very comfortable in that. That's so interesting. I think, and very fortunate. It says a lot about the quality of the work that you've done and the reputation you've made for yourself.
I hope so.
So maybe you mentioned in passing the premium plugins that you have. Can we talk about them for just a minute?
Sure, absolutely.
Why don't you describe a few of your, maybe some of your bigger plugins, just what you've got going on there?
Well, I've got 3 plugins that are all on the freemium model. So the free versions are WP to Twitter, which has about 90,000 users in the WordPress.org repo, and My Calendar, which I think is sitting around 40,000 users, and then a relatively new one that I just released last year called My Tickets, which is a ticket sales platform that goes along with My Calendar, which is obviously an events platform. And that, I think, is very small. It's only around 500 users right now, but that's fine. It's only a year old. And so I sell, obviously, I have a pro add-on for the Twitter plugin. I've got a pro add-on for My Calendar. And then I've got a variety of, like additional gateways and additional features that can expand the ticketing plugin. And so those are kind of where I've been shifting my focus in terms of income generation rather than developing new clients. And the funny thing is, the reason I landed in doing premium plugins at all is totally by accident. WP to Twitter was the first plugin I wrote, and I wrote it in 2008. And all I was doing is I wanted to learn how to work with the WordPress plugin API, and I wanted to learn how to work with the Twitter API, and it was also set up to work with a URL shortener as well that no longer exists, but I wanted to learn that. And so I was like, great, I'm going to learn all these things at once. I'm going to publish this plugin. It'll be awesome, cool. And then a couple years later, I have like 1 million downloads. I have no monetization, and I'm spending an enormous amount of my time doing support, a ridiculous amount, because Twitter, of course, they were switching over to OAuth at that time, and they were changing their API left and right and really not publicizing it very well, so things broke constantly, and it was really burning me out. And I had to make a decision. It's like, okay, either I'm going to ditch this plugin entirely, and say, no, I'm not adapting it to OAuth. I'm not doing that. I'm done, letting it go. Or I needed to make it premium so that I could actually, fund the work that I was doing on it because I was just spending so much time on it. And I decided to go premium. That's worked out pretty well for me. It's definitely, I don't stress out about it nearly as much as I used to, because if I need to spend a bunch of time doing some work on it, fine. I spend time working on it. That's what I'm being paid to do now that people are buying the premium version. That's great. I don't say to myself, God, I've got 18 support requests this morning, and if I do that, I don't get paid this week. So, it's worked out. But I would have done things differently if I'd started off with the intention of taking plugins premium rather than figuring I was just going to create this plugin that I'd learn some stuff from and then it would just kind of, disappear. The disappearing part didn't happen.
How are you supporting your plugins now?
Do you mean how do I actually handle tech support and that sort of thing?
Sure, yeah. How are things structured?
Well, basically every plugin has built-in support form that the users can submit, and that sends to my Help Scout account. And it includes a bunch of site information that's useful to me, like what version of PHP they're running, what version of WordPress, what version of the plugin, what other plugins are going on, and that's all disclosed to the user so that they see exactly what I'm going to be sent, and they can send that to me, and that's my primary way of taking support. I do support as well in the WordPress.org support forums, but it's really not my preferred way of doing support because it's just so hard to get good information.
Right.
Submitting the support form built into the plugins is always better. It's just that, I can't assume that their server can actually send email. So, I still have to go in and check in on other things. And then for premium users, they get flagged and go into a different track in Help Scout. And they also have a private forums that is in my own website that they can come to for issues if they need to. So that's basically it. But I pretty much do all my own support. I took a vacation in October for a couple of weeks, and I did hire somebody to handle support during that time, but mostly what they were doing is being somebody to answer and say, hey, Joe's on vacation, he'll get back to you in a couple of weeks, unless they were actually able to handle the problem, or if it was like really serious, like their site was totally trashed, or their site was hacked, or it was a security issue, then she had a private contact to get in touch with me directly. So
the important question out of all of that then is, where'd you go on vacation?
Oh, well, I flew to Portland, Oregon, and then my girlfriend and I took a driving trip south to San Francisco over the course of about 2 weeks, hiking in the redwoods and going along the coastal road, hanging out in San Francisco for a few days. Just had a good time.
Sounds nice.
It was. It was really, really nice. It was great having somebody handling my tech support while I was gone, because the vacation before that, I didn't have any of that. And so I literally, the entire vacation, I was spending at least an hour every day working. Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, that's not really my ideal for a vacation.
So you actually got to unplug then?
Yeah, pretty much.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it really, it was really nice. I should do that more often.
I'm jealous.
You should. You should. And you should tell us all about it.
Make you all feel jealous, right? Yeah.
No, please don't. Although, actually, my wife and I are planning a trip through the same kind of Napa, San Francisco area later this year, and it's very exciting.
Awesome.
So I want to know a little bit more about what is next. You've been doing consulting for years. Now you've got some products. And it sounds like these products are going well. It's a good experience for you. And so based on your experience with this additional revenue stream for your business, especially looking at the product side, what are some of the next things you do? Are you going to introduce new products? Are you going to change these products or add add-ons for them, or shift your strategy, or raise your prices, or just move into the product side more and less consulting? What's next for you?
Well, mostly I am moving more heavily into products. I'm just working on getting more stuff built into the premium version so that they can really handle the stuff that they need to handle, really have good added value compared to the free versions, because my calendar has the same deal that my Twitter plugin does, which is that I didn't build it with the intent to monetize, so it actually has like a lot of features that maybe would have been great candidates for a premium version if I'd been thinking that way, which obviously just makes it more difficult to decide what to put in as an expansion, because I really don't want to be taking features away from users. I really resent it when plugins decide to go premium and say, hey, all the stuff you used to have, now you have to pay us if you want to keep having it. I don't know, that bugs me. Yeah. I understand, but it does bug me.
So I'm going to switch gears a second here because I am really curious about some of this, and I didn't want to miss out before we ran out of time, which is I got to sit with you at the WordCamp Community Summit where we talked a little bit about accessibility theme review, and it was kind of shocking to me. So there are two things here. First of all, one, how I can sort of understand the path and what led you to become part of the accessibility team, but what made you decide to say, hey, I want to be one of, and get this, one of only 2 people who do reviews for themes as far as accessibility is concerned? What made you decide to take that on, and how's that going for you?
Well, it's even worse than that if you really think about it, because when I started the Accessibility Ready project, David Kennedy wasn't involved. So it was all me at the very beginning. Really, the thing about accessibility is that it's really a passion. It's a mission to say what I'm trying to do is make the web better for everybody. And so that's why I tend to give a lot of information away. I do speaking and all of this that isn't really reflected monetarily for me, because it's a passion. I want people to learn this information. So the Accessibility Ready thing started because we were doing a lot of work in getting the admin better. But the fact is, it's the public user experience that has vastly greater impact on the web. And we weren't really doing much for that. I mean, the core themes had some accessibility reviewing going on and some stuff going on, so those would be pretty solid. But in all practicality, only a fraction of websites are going to use the core theme and stick with them. It's not like it's the biggest choice. If you're really wanting to design a unique site, you're probably not going to pick the most common theme possible for your WordPress site. So I decided we needed to set up some kind of a system, some kind of guidelines for judging whether or not a theme could be considered accessible. A theme can't actually be accessible because accessibility is fundamentally a measurement of how you access the content, and a theme doesn't have content. That's not what it is. So all we can really judge is whether, if you just install this theme, with existing content, with the assumption that that content is accessible, do you have an accessible site? And so that's where the tests are based. They're all on just saying, ignoring content, is this going to make you able to have an accessible website? It doesn't guarantee that the website is accessible, it just means it's possible. And so I wrote up a draft proposal of the guidelines I wanted to use. I sent them for review to the theme review team via their email list, and also to Mel Pedley, who was at the time the accessibility team lead, and got finally, after about a year, got it approved. It was a little bit tricky because, of course, the theme tags are actually part of WordPress core, so it did require a core patch before it could actually go out, which meant the schedule had to be tied to a core release, and we had to be ready to go at that point. And so I just, when all that came down, what it came down to is that these had to be reviewed, and somebody had to review them who knew whether or not they were accessible, and that fell on me. And it's going really well. We've got additional reviewers now. I've done a lot of training. There are still hiccups because the system isn't perfect. You still have to notice that something has the accessibility ready tag to make sure that that review happens. And obviously, these are human reviews. We can make mistakes. I'm sure I've made mistakes. I've probably reviewed 70 or 80 themes. The likelihood I haven't made a mistake is really, really small. But on the whole, I'm really proud of that project. I think it's been amazingly successful. A year ago, right now, we only had about 18, 20 themes that were marked as accessibility ready. Now we're pushing 100. I've got another 6 or 7 theme reviews that I'm currently in process on. It's great. It's a lot of work, but I'm really proud of it. So I feel like it's been working out well.
So I'm just going to ask one really quick follow-up on that. So if somebody was interested in, say, becoming a theme reviewer, specifically in the area that we're talking about, would you say that that's something that requires a special level of skill, or is it something that you can train pretty easily for someone? What would you say to somebody who's interested in it?
What I'd say is if you already have the knowledge base to be a theme reviewer, I can probably get you everything you need to know to do the accessibility review in under an hour. That still is going to require you to use it and practice it to remember it, but the actual information that needs to be conveyed is just not that extensive.
Cool.
I'm just wondering, so you say it's just you and one other person right now. Have you maybe considered doing something like Triple J did, maybe a crowdsourcing to cover that, your time and expenses on that?
You know, I haven't thought about that. I mean, that's probably not a bad idea.
I bring it up because I would definitely contribute to something like that because I can't mentally contribute to the project there, but I would donate to something like that.
And there are actually 3 people now. There is a third person who has gone through the whole theme review process and is actually, you know, doing accessibility ready reviews. I've trained at least 4 people now, but only one of them has actually followed through so far to be doing reviews, and that's Robert Jolly, who is a really great guy, and he's really helping out. So, you know, 3, obviously, that's still not very many for handling the number of views we have. I don't even want to talk about how long the theme review queue is right now. But, yeah,
don't cry, Joe.
Just an idea.
Don't cry.
I'm sorry. It's so hard. My life sucks. Yeah, that's not true.
Well, so I kind of want to switch a little bit. What's the impact of this? So I've listened to your lynda.com classes, and one of the aspects you covered very briefly was the legal aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was wondering what countries and what kind of laws are being implemented in countries that are requiring this. Do you have any information on that side of the house?
Well, the legal aspect is really complicated. Norway and Canada are both doing some really serious laws. The Netherlands also have some pretty serious laws. The U.S. is in a complicated situation in that Section 508 only applies to government acquisition of technology, and that means if the government is paying for a website to be built, it applies. However, the Department of Justice can act in it as its own interpretive body. So the Department of Justice is pursuing people who are creating inaccessible websites on the basis of the interpretation of the ADA that equal accommodation is required under the law for websites. The ADA, of course, was written in 1991 and made law in 1991, so it doesn't cover websites, really, at all, not in any way whatsoever. But it does require that businesses provide equal accommodation for people with disabilities. And so the Department of Justice is interpreting that as this issue. And so conceivably that could go to the Supreme Court for a judgment. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an expert in this, but it is a very complex picture because there's no law, at least within the United States, there's no law that explicitly affects business websites. But there are laws that imply it and could be used, and that's where a lot of the major lawsuits that have gone on around web accessibility have come from. Additionally, with any web-based law, there's some real complexities about what jurisdiction applies. Like, you know, you look at something like the European VAT laws about taxation of online sales, and what their position is that it depends on the location of the buyer. So if a buyer in the UK buy something from your web-based store, an online product from your web-based store in Milwaukee, you're liable to pay that VAT tax, even though you are not governed by that law. So with all of the international nature of websites, interpretation of what laws apply are really complicated. You know, and the same thing is going to be true of something like, you know, the Canadian laws about websites being accessible. Like, well, if a Canadian is accessing a United States-based website, what does that mean? And that's going to be very open to long-term interpretation. So it's hard to answer that question. Really hard. You could pay a lawyer a lot to not answer that question.
You practically have to have a law degree in order to come close to talking about the subject.
I kind of feel like every time I talk about law, I'm confident this is one of the areas where I'm almost certainly saying something that's not true, but might require at least 6 lawyers to discuss it to determine whether or not it's true. I have no idea, but it's complicated, you know. And ultimately, my feeling is, you know, the law is all well and good, but you should be making your website accessible because it's clearly the right thing to do. It's the moral choice. You're not blocking people from using your website. It's also the sensible business choice because in the long run, it's a lot cheaper to create an accessible business website first than it is to get sued, pay your legal fees, and fix it later. I mean, why would you want that?
Right.
So the law, you know, I wouldn't worry too much about whether or not the law applies. I'd say maybe it applies. I should probably fix my website regardless.
Right. I'm thinking that, you know, the new guy, small and pop business hires their, you know, their nephew to build his first website, you know, professionally for a business in Canada. You know, what kind of impact is that going to have? You know, obviously I know you're not going to be the legal expert on the Canadian laws, but, you know, you start thinking about that kind of thing, and I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I'm going to take that conversation a little bit sideways, and I think this relates to issues about the professionalization of web development. There's been a lot of talk recently about creating a professional association, a really legitimate professional association for web developers. And one of the reasons for that is that it gives you a voice that can be used to communicate with people who make laws. You know, if there's going to be a big law about pipe fitting, the pipe fitting trade association will get consulted because they are the recognized professional association for that trade. And right now, web development is all over the map. I mean, I'm self-taught. Mm-hmm. I don't have any professional certification of any kind. So there's no voice. There's nobody to talk to when the government is making a law that impacts the web, for them to get consultation and say, can we get somebody who is in a position of authority to comment on this law we're trying to create? And that's one of the essential problems, is the fact that it's really important economically for these laws to be in place governing issues like security, privacy, and accessibility, but there's no professional association ensuring that the people doing this actually know what they need to know.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
And obviously that doesn't guarantee that the professional association will be right in all ways, but it can still set a baseline of, you have to know how to properly escape your information and sanitize, and you have to know the basics of accessibility. There will always be complex problems, but in principle, if you at least understand the basics, you should be able to avoid most challenges.
That's amazing, and such a powerful subject. I mean, historically, there's no shortage of issues that we could, I'm sure, think of where regulations on technology or something as fast changing as the web have proven to be problematic. Generally, when lawmakers are passing laws relating to technology that is ever changing or is hard to define or that they don't themselves understand quite well, then we end up with issues. But still, things need to be done, and so you raise some compelling points. And I'm curious, about, I guess, a little bit about your take on maybe the landscape. Are positive things being done? Are good laws being passed? Or do you see a lot of problems are manifesting where there is a lack of expertise where laws are being discussed and made?
Oh, I think there definitely is a lack of expertise. I mean, if you look at anything like the cookie disclosure laws in the UK, forcing people to have to display a notice telling users that this site uses cookies, and they have to agree or reject the use of cookies. Anybody who doesn't understand what a cookie is and is worried about privacy is going to reject that. And that means now they can't log in, they can't make purchases, they can't use the website effectively. And that's mostly because of an ignorance about what cookies are and how they're used. And that law really could have been much better. Because really it should be about, like third-party tracking cookies.
That's a great example.
Probably need to reject that.
Yeah.
And the law was not written by people with a deep basis of knowledge about information technology, and as a result, it's kind of messy and it's hard to interpret, and it's certainly hard to treat seriously. You might know, yeah, I've got to follow this, but it's idiotic. So, and that comment, I mean, I know there's also right now in the U.S. there's the debate over giving a backdoor to encryption for the U.S. government, which is absolutely idiotic.
Right.
I mean, a backdoor is a backdoor for everybody. If you create a backdoor, everybody's got a backdoor. You can't, put a lock on it, say, U.S. government only. Give me a break. That's so, yeah, there really needs to be some good consultation on how these laws are written, or we're never going to have a really functional system.
Gosh, what a conundrum. Like, laws need to be made. Lawmakers don't have the expertise to make the right laws, but who are the experts that they consult? There's no single authority on these topics. Everyone has their own opinions and
it requires a deep understanding. That's the problem, is that this is going to get into a whole different thing, and we're going to end up running, but you end up with the people who make the laws don't understand the first thing about technology most of the time. So they have people giving them a snapshot, and then they make the laws based on this little snapshot. I actually remember back in the days when Netscape was going after Microsoft for antitrust for Internet Explorer and all that, and I watched some of the hearings, and I remember just watching these government officials, these lawmakers that really were asking questions that weren't even relevant, and then making laws based on the questions they were asking. So, it really is crazy.
Yeah, it's weird. Well, thanks for your take on that, Joe. Such a fascinating subject, and I'm sure all of us agree we could talk a lot more about this because these are big topics, and you've got a
They
lot,
are, yeah.
lot to share. I feel like I've learned a lot already. But it is about time to wrap up here. So we've got just a couple final questions here, just before we say goodnight. First is what events are on your calendar? Where do you plan on popping in person? Any kind of event? Anything?
Well, I'm going to be presenting on WordPress accessibility and backwards compatibility at the CSUN conference in San Diego at the end of March. That's a conference on disabilities in technology. So that'll be really great. That's going to be it's a complicated topic. You know, the ways that maintaining backwards compatibility causes difficulties when you're trying to implement major changes, essentially.
Sure.
Then let's see, after that, I'll probably plan on speaking at WordCamp Minneapolis. It's not scheduled yet, so really no idea. I'm going to be at WordCamp Europe. I haven't submitted a talk, but I'm definitely going to be there. And yeah, I don't know. I don't have any specific plans. I've got some podcasts I'll be on in the next month or so. A webinar I'll be doing, but
Great.
lots of stuff.
Well, I certainly hope to bump into you in person at a few more events this year. We'll all be attending our fair share, I'm sure. I think you've attended Chicago in the past, and that's on the calendar for. Last I checked, it had a date scheduled, but that's aside.
Yeah, they didn't have one last year, so I didn't go to that.
Right.
Obviously.
Well, hopefully that'll change in 2016, and we'll hang out. So, last question I have for you is: do you have any great recommendations for people you think would be other good guests for the show?
Well, I think there are a ton of people who'd be great guests. You know, obviously, I tend to be biased towards the accessibility people, but you know, you did just have me, so you can probably manage that.
I don't think we can overdo this subject.
Definitely not. Yeah, I don't know. I wish I'd thought about that in advance. There's a lot of great people. Like there's just no end. I think, you know, Robert Jolly, the new guy doing theme reviews for the accessibility ready tag, it would be a really interesting perspective because he's primarily a project manager who works a lot in WordPress. He got his start with Jeffrey Zeldman doing project management for Happy Cog. And so he's got a really interesting background that would be a very different perspective. I mean, you know, he's definitely been in the trenches of usability and web standards for a long time, but, you know, from a different perspective.
That's a good recommendation.
Trying to pick somebody who isn't, you know, one of the obvious choices.
That's perfect. I always appreciate those. Thank you. So just before we sign off, is there anything else that you wanted to share, or how people maybe can get in touch with you, or if there's anything that you care to promote or think is relevant at this time?
Well, you know, right now I'm really trying to promote people to make use of the Tenon.io accessibility testing suite. It's in extensive development. I built a plugin for WordPress that uses it called Access Monitor. And it's a really cool ability to do some valuable automated testing, but ultimately it needs people to actually decide to sign up and create accounts if it's going to survive, and I'm going to be able to continue to have this ability in WordPress. So, you know, take a look at it. It's really very cool. They're actively developing more and more testing capabilities, and it'll be awesome. I think that's going to really explode in 2016. And as far as getting in touch with me, you can ping me on Twitter. You can go to my website, joedolson.com, and those are really the best ways to get in touch.
Cool.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate you coming on the show and talking with us. I think this has been a super valuable episode, and I look forward to hanging out with you again in the future.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. This was really great fun. Had a great time.
Well, thanks for joining us. I look forward to catching up on all the information because I think there's a lot of critical stuff coming out in the accessibility world, and I'd like to keep in touch, keep on it.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
You too.